help you understand what's happening in the Middle East. Let's go back to 1953. In 1953, Mossadegh was the prime minister of Iran. Iran had oil, and the British had exploited oil. In fact, it was Daisy in the early 1900s that first found oil in Iran. And they set up a company, a joint British, Iranian, or Persian oil company, which is known to be BP today. The British were extracting, the Americans also came to the party. Oil was a big commodity then. But guess what happened? In 1953, or leading up to 1953, Mossadegh says, why will most of Iranian oil be going to the British and Americans? So they said we were going to nationalize Iranian oil. The Americans did not like this. They sent the CIA there, they planted a coup. Hamid Roosevelt, I think one of the descendants of former American President Theodore Roosevelt, was said to have delivered that money. And when they sent that money, a coup happened. Finally, they gave the Shah more powers, and the Shah consolidated on his powers. But they signed an agreement that 40% of Iranian oil will go to American companies, 40% pretty much goes to Britain and Iran, another 14% goes to Dutch, Netherlands, and 8% goes to a French company. So Iranian oil was largely in the hands of the West. And once that happened, they had no problem. They lived in peace and harmony. The Shah was a poster boy, and all of that happened. But guess what? It becomes interesting. While all of that happened, in the 70s, the Shah also felt, oh, what can I do to be able to be part of this oil party, as it were? So the Shah says, I also want to be part of this Iranian oil party. And what did the Shah do? The Shah asked for another agreement in the 70s. This Western partner signed it. But before then, Iran had a lot of oil. The Shah was living good. He was trying to modernize Iran, and he continued it that way. Nothing was wrong because the Americans were getting their oil and nothing was stopping them. So they felt their interest was served. Fast forward, while all of this was happening, the Shah had opposition. The Pahlavi dynasty had a big opposition in a certain man called Khamenei. Khomeini, and Khomeini was a Muslim mullah, a Shia leader, and he was constantly opposing the Shah. Then people like Khamenei felt that the Shah had a lot going for him. In fact, in 1971, he hosted what was called the biggest party in the world. And the biggest party in the world was in favor of the Shah trying to show Persian culture had come of age, and there was a lot of Persian dominance and Persian supremacy. In fact, he had like 62 world leaders there in the desert, and it was a day of culture and splendor. It was said that they imported a lot of food, caviar, 2,700 kilograms of beef, just to be able to feed all of these their dignitaries. That event, just to be able to show the Iranian culture, was estimated at over $100 million. Over $100 million in a country where only $400 was the GDP per capita. A little over $400 was GDP per capita. So the likes of Khomeini also exaggerated and said, oh, that is wrong. What the Shah had done was wrong. They wanted a regime change. And all of that continued. The West was still trying to defend the Shah, but the pressure was so much. Around that period, the Shah was already down with cancer. So the Shah left, and Khomeini, that had been on exile, now came and took over. And they had something called the Iranian Revolution, and they had something called the Iran nuclear crisis. You can get a fuller video. If you're watching on Facebook, it's not a full video. The full video is on VO News on YouTube. And that's where I'm going to be doing all my full videos now. The full video is on VO News. So when that happened, the mullahs took over and they started being at loggerheads with the Americans. They said they wanted the Shah to return, and they should return all the monies they had taken away from them. And that they wanted the money to be able to develop Iran. The hostage crisis was a big one for President Carter then. In fact, it led to President Carter losing the elections in the 80s. He lost re-election. He was a one-term president. Reagan came in, and things were sorted. But America started looking for options to be able to fight Iran. So when Iraq thought that Iranian dominance was a lot in that region, and Iraq invaded Iran in the early 80s, that war lasted till 1988, the Americans actually supported Iraq. So during the Iran-Iraq war, the Americans funneled money, technical expertise, and weapons to Iraq to be able to fight Iran. But guess what happened? That war ended in a stalemate. Iraq, being emboldened by that war, did something interesting. And they needed to pay their war debts. So what did they do? They went ahead and tried to invade Kuwait because most of their debt was owed to the Saudi Arabia and the Kuwaits. The debt was about $14 billion. Already emboldened with American weapons, Saddam Hussein stormed in there. The Americans said, we're not having any of this. So the Americans fought back in favor of Kuwait, which they collected money for. Operation Desert Storm was not for free. The Americans collected about $15 billion from Kuwait to help them fight off Saddam Hussein. In fact, Saddam Hussein had invaded Kuwait, made one of his relative the Kuwaiti governor, and looted over $1 billion from the Kuwaiti central bank. But America repelled all of that and attacked Iraq. Iraq felt the only way to protect itself after America, that had been its ally before, the only way, don't forget, America was allies with Saddam Hussein. They used Saddam Hussein to do their dirty job when he was fighting against Iran. So when they are fighting against their enemies, they can coalesce. But when they have their interest involved, then definitely they fight back. So Saddam Hussein felt the best way for me to be able to protect myself was to get a nuclear weapon. So he started a nuclear program, and Americans didn't like it. But guess what? On the flip side of it, countries like Israel have nuclear programs which they wouldn't come out openly tell the world. But America feels there's nothing wrong with it. But countries like Iran, which was an American ally before, wanted to have a nuclear weapon because they felt threatened how America came to bombard them in Operation Desert Storm when America was fighting to liberate Kuwait and getting money for also that war. So that went on in the 90s. Iran had some leeway. They also, after the Iran-Iraq war, felt that it would not be a bad idea to be able to get a nuclear weapon. Because if you get a nuclear weapon, it's harder for people just to come and overreach. In the 90s, global geopolitics changed. Nuclear non-proliferation was the order of the day. And America started negotiating that countries, should tone down on this nuclear armament. They had a deal with Russia. the Soviet Union. Before the breakage of the Soviet Union, this was led by Gorbachev, Mikhail Gorbachev. Gorbachev, because he was partners with America, was a hero in the West, was such a hero that Mikhail Gorbachev actually starred in a Pizza Hut advertisement. And then they also negotiated with countries like Ukraine that had a lot of nuclear warheads from the Soviet Union, but they handed them over to Russia with intent that they were going to protect them. In the early 2000s, after the Osama bin Laden incident happened, America felt, oh, let's just go into the Middle East and take care of what is happening in the Middle East and take care of all of our enemies once and for all. And they got another lie and say Saddam Hussein has got a weapon of mass destruction. So they used that to get into Iraq. And they went to fight the Taliban. Don't forget, the Taliban, which were also allies of America in something called the Cold War. After the Second World War, something happened called the Cold War, where ideological blocs, capitalism and socialism, were at loggerheads. Russia and pretty much America were at war, but it was a Cold War, as the name implies. So, while that happened, America needed people to take care of Russia. Who did they contract? The Mujahideens. Mujahideens that morphed into Afghanistan, the Taliban. They had an American called Charlie Wilson. There's a movie to that effect called Charlie Wilson's War, who they used to supply weapons to the Mujahideens to help them fight the Russians during the Cold War in the Balkans. So, America in the early 2000s was now fighting against its two former allies, Iran and Iraq. So in international diplomacy, there's no permanent friend and there's no permanent enemy. That fight continued in 2000. In the next edition, I'm going to tell you what else happened. If you really enjoyed this edition, share as much as possible. Go to VO News to watch the full package on YouTube. Bless you all.